Hello and welcome to today's video. Since people ask me to combine smaller ideas that don't quite come to fruition on their own together in one big video, I now have this. This video is basically the result of all the oddities and quirks I've noticed over the years while researching Oblivion. As you'll find out, Oblivion's consistent design is actually quite inconsistent at the same time, and with that I hope you'll enjoy this geeky monstrosity. I promise that you'll learn something new today, and there's gonna be some cut content sprinkled in between. This is gonna be your equivalent to those 40 minutes of pointless facts about something videos. Although these things have a bit of a point at least, as they show both a bit of Bethesda game design philosophy as well as how to recognize cut content and repurposed content. Our first stop being... If you've been following this channel for a while, then you know that I often bring up the rigidness and formulaic nature of Oblivion's game design, and when discussing the local settlements, this is no different. Actually, for the towns, I'd go one step further and say that Oblivion's design philosophy here even borders on utilitarianism. What do I mean by this? Well, there isn't a single inhabited location outside of the major cities in Oblivion that exists without purpose. All towns, villages or other small hamlets either exist to serve as a set piece for a quest or are the starting point of one. Is this a problem? Not really, no, but it's not really organic game design, as while both Morrowind and Skyrim just had places inhabited by NPCs for the sake of it, Oblivion does not, and that makes it stand out. Now maybe you've been thinking to yourself, is there really not a single town in Oblivion that doesn't exist for the purpose of being quest related? Well, in a way there is. And that would be Blanket March. It consists of 3 houses, inhabited by 3 NPCs, and the town isn't connected to any quests. But the reason as to why that is the case is because it was created because of a quest, but said quest got cut from the game, leaving the entire place without purpose. As none of the inhabitants have anything unique to say or do, you could easily just cut Blanket March from the game and nothing would change. But while we're on the topic of Blanket March, here is something else that's interesting. Of the 3 houses present, only one has a door that is owned, and it isn't owned by someone in town. No, instead it's owned by Darji, the Leyawiin resident. Now, why would this door in this random settlement be owned by Darji? Well, that's easy. Just take a look at the exterior of Darji's house in Leyawiin and compare it to the relevant house in Blankenmarch. Yup, they're identical. And that means there's quite a big chance that the developers just copy-pasted the house from Leyawiin to here and forgot to change the ownership. Busted. Funnily enough, this isn't even the only instance of Darji's house getting copied either. No, in the Khajiit town of Borderwatch, Mdir's house is also owned by him. And doesn't that house look familiar? This time, the interior is also still owned by Darji, showing the devs did an even worse cleanup job here. Speaking of bad cleanup jobs though, this copy and paste problem runs rampant in the town of Borderwatch. Of the 5 houses present, 4 of them show traces of being copy pasted from Leyawiin citizens. And while the local inn's building doesn't have any leftovers, the merchant chests are still owned by Witsy Dutsi from Leyawiin, which is even stranger. At the end of the day though, Borderwatch is just a set piece for the Sheogorath quest, and all the related citizens were created for that singular purpose, to play a role in said quest. Although there are far more egregious examples as we'll get to. Bleaker's Way, for example, only exists to be the set piece for the Mephala quest, but with 8 buildings and an inn, with no obvious traces of copying, this isn't half bad as far as Oblivion villages go. Like Borderwatch, it at least has some kind of theme. Ailswell is also pretty inoffensive as far as small hamlets go. It is just a set piece for the quest Zero Visibility, and nothing else really. Now for Brindleholm. This is one of the bad villages. It basically consists of 2 houses. One is Astante's home, which is a copy of the Cheydinhal stables, wrong ownership and all. And the second is Torbold the Sufficient's house, which is a copy of Modron Orin's house from Coral. And I'll give you 3 guesses as to how I know that. Also, Astante's home is the only abode in the entire game where it's called someone's home rather than their house. So that's odd. And for some reason, Torbol here was featured on one of the game's pre-release screenshots. Because, sure, why not? There are also 4 horses in town, which are also owned by people from Cheydinhal. This is simply due to them also being copied wholesale alongside the Cheydinhal stables. I mean, there aren't even 4 people in town. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's not the blatant copying or ownership mistakes that make this village bad to me, no. It's just that they put together 3 random NPCs for the sole purpose of giving you dialogue pointing to a nearby house in the wilderness for Moloch Baal's quest. Outside the quest, the village might as well not exist. If you removed its whole 2 houses, nothing of value would be lost. The village of Cropsford doesn't yet exist at first, but its construction is the whole point of the Goblin Trouble quest. It's fine enough for what it is. Hackdirt is also pretty inoffensive. While it is the set piece for a quest, it has some interesting lore behind it at the very least, even if it is only brought up during said quest. All of the buildings in town are copies from Coral style buildings, which is usually how it goes. The big city closest to the particular town is usually the one where its assets got ripped from. With some exceptions of course, such as the previously mentioned Brindleholm, which is closest to Skingrad but reuses Coral and Cheydinal houses, but not ones of the particular architectural style, only those of the generic style, as to not clash too hard, you know, we wouldn't want that. I'd like to also take this moment to tell you that I'm generally not a fan of having a generic building style in these games. Like in Morrowind it mostly worked because all factions kinda had their own building style, and there wasn't really a generic one to speak of. Minor dwellings generally used the same styles as seen in the bigger holdings. Then Oblivion had a different building style for each major city, and then some of the villages had a generic style like Ailswell, Bleakersway and the generic farmhouses, while some other places would reuse a particular city's building style, like Hackdirt. But there are also some low-class generic shacks/houses which can also be seen in villages, as well as in Coral, and in the Imperial City's waterfront district. But then Skyrim would go completely overboard with this, as not even all cities have their own unique style, with Dawnstar, Mortal, Falkreath and Winterhold just reusing the generic farmhouse buildings. That is a pretty big stretch in itself, as Winterhold, Mortal and Falkreath have wildly different climates and vegetation, which makes the samey wooden huts stick out, but I can never forgive Bethesda for not just using the same style of stone building for the College of Winterhold on the rest of the town. Honestly, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But now back to the business at hand. Harlan's Watch might be the worst example of a town in the entire game. While there is no ownership weirdness going on, it does have that forced Cyrodiil cosmopolitan feel. I mean, you have 1 Dark Elf, 1 Wood Elf and a Khajiit and an Argonian sharing a home. Why? How? How did these people meet? What are their relationships like? None of those questions will ever get answered, as all but one of these people get nothing but generic quest-related dialogue, while the exception gets slightly less generic quest-related dialogue. And that dialogue sure is voice acted, alright, let me tell you.
Oh no, you believe trolls killed them? That's horrible. Good that you killed all of the trolls, though. Please take this with our gratitude.
Okay, from this point forward, I'm not gonna be making fun of the voice acting anymore, and you shouldn't either if you know that Bethesda decided to record these lines alphabetically. And no, I couldn't possibly tell you why either. Then again, you are allowed to make fun of these quest-related lines, as they do actually follow each other up if you look at them alphabetically. Yet they still sound like the poor voice actor was given less than nothing in the form of direction. But the biggest problem with this town is again its function over form design mentality. This place basically only exists for a single Fighters Guild quest. Said quest has you investigating disappearances from town, and you find 1 intact body and numerous skeletons. These are all implied to be from the village. But where would these people have lived? There are only 3 buildings in town, and I don't believe they would have all shared these houses. Were some of them relatives of the people you find still living there? Well, we won't find out, since the people living in town just act as quest dialogue dispensers, as that's their purpose, not to be a part of the world. Once the quest is complete, they lose their only function. The next town, Pell's Gate, suffers from exactly the same problem. You have a Redguard, a Nord, a Breton and an Imperial. And no, this isn't a bar joke, even though this is one of the few towns to have their own separate inn. Not to worry though, as while the developers did place an inn, they didn't think to, code the publican correctly as to actually make the inn function as such. Also, despite only having 4 people in the village, there are only 3 buildings, as 2 of them live at the inn. Smart. Spells Gate, once again, just exists to point you in the direction of a person you need for a data quest, very similar to Moloch Ball's setup, only this time it's for Clavicus File. And once again, this town has the potential to be something more, as it's implied that the person who became Umbra once lived here, but nothing is done with this setup, at all. 3 of the locals say talk to that person, and then that person will progress your quest by telling you to go elsewhere, and bam, your whole town made pointless in just 5 easy lines of dialogue. Then there's also Water's Edge. This town is a bit less offensively bad than the last 2. We're back to having a team at least, with all the villagers being Bretons. Also, this town does something crazy and isn't just a setting for 1 Fighters Guild quest, but for 2 Fighters Guild quests. I know, almost too crazy to believe. The idea isn't even that bad. You have a kinda emotional connection to one of the townspeople due to having helped them in a previous quest, which makes it all the more sad when they inevitably die. Or at least, I suppose that's what the intent was. After playing Telltale's The Walking Dead, seeing a couple of random people slain doesn't even begin to affect you, but you gotta look at it in its time. Kinda funny though, that they gave everyone in town the same singular unique AI package, which they didn't set up correctly, resulting in no one from town ever being able to leave their homes. Ah, Bethesda, you never change. And then our final town isn't even a town. It gets called a settlement in-game, but that's really stretching it. Way is the name given to the settlement, but Way is actually just a singular house. However, at some point Bethesda placed a walnut inn right next to it and decided that would be enough to call it a settlement, and named the whole place Way. Yet despite that, they still gave the walnut inn its own map marker. You know, these places weren't meant to be intertwined when neither of the 2 NPCs living there ever mentioned the other's existence, and the fisherman doesn't ever visit the inn to have a drink. They live in completely separate existences. The separate little farmhouses dotted around the map have the exact same problem, with them only really existing for quest-related purposes. More than half of the people living there just give you random busywork. I'm not even going to go over those, so I'll throw their names on screen right now. All of these are just pointless, if not more so than the villages I've mentioned. Maybe Applewatch is an exception, due to it appearing more than once in a specific faction questline, just like Water's Edge. But yeah, at the end of the day, all the towns in Oblivion are very strange. They feel very inorganic, which is something that I feel hinders the overall vibe the game is trying to go for. While I completely understand the copy-pasting as a method to quickly create towns, I just don't care for any of them, because we're never given a reason to. I don't mind the ownership mistakes, because I know just how little quality assurance testing Oblivion had, but still, crafting these locations like this was a mistake from the very start, and it's such a glaring mistake to the point where I don't get that none of the developers ever thought to change it around. Though I guess that hindsight is 2020, because I get that same impression about Skyrim's implementation of Radiant content, but that's such a big part of that game's core gameplay loop. Still, I'd be completely okay with just gutting all of the Radiant questing out of it, even if that means there's a whole lot less to play, because the Radiant quests just feel very soulless, just like the towns in Oblivion. I know they didn't have the tech back then, but those whole towns might just as well have been completely auto-generated, as they are as empty and characterless as when a program working with code would do it. But what if all this rambling didn't quite do it for you yet? Oh well, then I have just the thing for you. Let's tackle some more weird buildings that are just as pointless, but now 10 times as mysterious. You know them, you maybe love them, but every Elder Scrolls game needs to have some cozy inns for the player to rest in. Oblivion, being the lovely little safety blanket that it is, has 2 inns per town, while the Imperial City has up to 2 inns per district. Some of the previously mentioned towns also have inns, but all around Cyrodiil you can also find random roadside inns that either exist for no reason at all, or, and say it with me now, because they're the setting for a quest. For example, you have the Inn of Ill Omen, which houses an innkeeper and 2 patrons. This inn is the setting for the Dark Brotherhood initiation quest, and even then it feels kinda strange as the innkeeper isn't dressed like one, Instead, his inventory would more so be for the blacksmith. Something I like to do is look at a character's form ID and look which NPCs were created at the same time. Since most of these inn-related people were created separately, you often get some weird results. However, this isn't the case here, as innkeeper Mannheim Molhand as well as patrons Minerva and Rufio were all created concurrently. Not only that, but they were also created at the same time as the other Dark Brotherhood members. This shows that, weirdly enough, this inn wasn't an afterthought, even if it feels like one. That doesn't explain Mannheim's weird inventory though. On a similar note, there's also the Drunken Dragon Inn, run by Andreas Draconis. He doesn't have a single unique patron, but may sometimes be visited by an Imperial Legion forester. He is also the victim of a Dark Brotherhood quest, and his whole inn just exists to kinda line up with his backstory, I suppose. Andreas was at the very least created concurrently with his siblings that will also meet their end during this quest, although if he was always intended to be an innkeeper from the very start, I couldn't tell you. I mean, if the developers wanted to be really lazy, they could have just plopped him in a random cave. What's that? Oh right. The next inn is also one that's normally just found completely bereft of patrons, the Goldshaw Inn, run by the Bosmer Forok. This inn isn't even connected to any quests at all, strangely enough. I guess I should also note this due to me finding it interesting, but just like the towns, these inns flip-flop between using generic town architecture or just straight up reusing city pieces. The Goldshaw Inn here, weirdly enough, uses Coral House Middle O2 as its base. This house is used twice in test cells, and besides the inn, its only other appearance is as Geraldine Doran's house of all people. The only point in this inn existing, I suppose, is the fact that innkeeper Forok is one of two basic trainers in Mercantile. And this fact is pretty eyebrow raising to me, because if you're familiar with Oblivion's arena cut content, then you know that not one, but two master trainers were just randomly given this role after their original purpose as arena gatekeeper was scrapped. And in my personal experience, when a trainer in Oblivion doesn't explicitly mention the fact that they are a trainer in dialogue, there's usually some repurposing going on. For Forok though, I couldn't tell you why he was given such a pointless skill level to begin with. The one other notable thing about him is that there is only a single NPC that was created at the same time as him, as he falls in between a row of test NPCs and miscellaneous quest corpses. And that one other person is Davella Laren. And you would have never guessed it, but Davella is actually another random roadside innkeeper. She's also not tied to any quests and a trainer. This time she's an advanced hand-to-hand trainer, for whatever reason. So yeah, we're now located at the Imperial Bridge Inn, and despite that name, we're not right next to a bridge near the Imperial City. No, that would make too much sense. We're still kinda near a bridge, yes, but it's just in the County Breville wilderness. We do have a customer of note though, the Altmer sorcerer named Lidnillion. He gives out the quest No Stone Unturned, and I think every Skyrim player just got some bad flashbacks. But the quest itself isn't that noteworthy. The stage that gets set if you find the note before encountering the man is interesting though, as your character can apparently get that Lidnillion is located at the inn from his notes, despite his notes literally implying the opposite. Still, this quest is internally marked as an SQ, or Settlement Quest, and almost all of these quests are started at either one of these random inns, or at one of the random farmhouses which I've previously stated aren't worthy of our time. Another one of these quests, for example, can be started by talking to Malene, owner of the Roxy Inn, arguably the most crowded inn of them all. So if you were thinking that these inns weren't thought out that badly, listen to this one. So here you have this inn, run by a woman who gives you random cave clearing quests. She has two regulars living at the inn, an inconsequential guy, and just for funsies, the master trainer for heavy armor. And then there are also 4 random quest related NPCs that also get dumped here when they aren't needed for the quest. This all leads to a not so great gameplay experience. I honestly don't know what to make of this setup. Malene was at least created around the same time as the inconsequential guy I mentioned, Boreon, but that doesn't mean much. Then the 4 quest related guys were created at the same time, and I genuinely don't know why they're here. Honestly, Normally Oblivion just disables NPCs until they're needed for their respective quests. For example, Phalion, Atrina, Jurl, Jagasta, all these people and more have lines of dialogue that go unused because they're only enabled by quest, at which point their dialogue gets overwritten. But these guys, they're always present, despite the fact that outside the quest they don't have any unique dialogue and the only purpose they serve is to crowd up the place. And then finally you have Pranal, the master trainer. His story is at least connected to Malene, and she acknowledges his existence, unlike those of all other patrons. I was gonna mention how stupid his training requirement task is, and it might be number 1 or 2 right after Jabari's, but unlike Jabari, I can't confirm if this was intentional or just a late in development fix-up job due to him losing his original role or location, though of course I highly suspect it to be the latter. But here's the thing, Pranal wasn't created alongside any of the other NPCs that appear at the inn. No, the NPC closest to him is actually a Khajiit by the name of Abuki. Also of note is that Pranal, just like the other quest guys, isn't a part of the Roxy Inn faction, unlike Borean and Malene, who were likely really the only 2 NPCs initially meant to reside here. Weirder is the fact that Pranal doesn't have any factions at all, and he's not even the weirdest NPC we'll be encountering in this chapter. But this Abuki lady Pranal was created with, who's she? Well, she's the publican of a completely different random roadside inn, namely the Fairgal Inn. This inn checks all the oddity boxes. The publican is a random trainer? Check. You've got a random NPC whose existence isn't acknowledged that offers the player a settlement quest? Check. There is a random master trainer just hanging around? Checkaroo. Although, to be fair, at the very least they tried to give Alex Lancolia a logical reason for being where he is. That and his training requirement isn't the stupidest thing I've ever heard. One thing where they screwed him over is his AI packages. Or should I say package. Yeah, they just gave him a singular AI package to make him wander around the inn. No eating, no sleeping. The devs just didn't care enough for poor Alex. This gets even stranger when you note that there are unused NPCs with way more elaborate schedules. Fun coding fact here, almost all of the rentable doors in the inns throughout Cyrodiil are owned by Abuki. This was likely done to make sure other innkeepers don't trespass in your room. Why was Abuki chosen for this? Well, likely out of convenience, as her name appears as the very first listed alphabetically when working in the construction set. However, the developers couldn't use the same trick on the door of her own inn, so that one is instead owned by Adamus Philida, who is alphabetically listed as the second NPC. That leaves us with only 2 more inns to dissect, and I honestly don't know which one is stranger. So let's start off with the Walnut Inn. The Walnut Inn is located just to the side of the main bridge heading into the Imperial City. Man, wouldn't it be cool to name an inn after that? That would make sense, wouldn't it? Yeah. I wish the strangeness would stop there, but no. Innkeeper Nerusa, thank the gods, isn't some random trainer, but she does offer you a random settlement quest. I mean, what else is she gonna do with her otherwise empty tavern? Oh yeah, tavern. Now that I mention that, this place is internally known as Walnut Inn Tavern, for some reason. It shares this quirk with the Imperial Bridge Inn, the Godshaw Inn, and Coral's the Oak Enclosure, for reasons I can't possibly fathom. And like I mentioned in the previous chapter, besides the name not making a lick of sense, the Walnut Inn and Way have separate map markers, despite literally appearing as neighboring buildings. This just seems like someone had to scale back the map size, which made these buildings end up next to each other, as otherwise they have zero connection whatsoever. And then we get to our final inn, the Brina Cross Inn. I don't know where to start with this one. I think I might have mentioned it in my video on Such, as when Such still appeared on the map you had a crossing as well, which was marked as Brina Cross, which is in all likelihood where this inn got its name from. For the longest time I suspected that this inn was put there to cover the removed content up, but I think that's the wrong way around. See, when there was a crossing in the road here, this inn actually would have made sense as a place of rest for the weary traveler. Now though, it's just a leftover concept, kinda like the Nightgate Inn in Skyrim. However, I've got a brand new cut content theory coming up for you in just a second. Unlike all the other roadside inns, the Brina Cross is involved in the Mages Guild recommendation quest. Apparently there have been multiple travelers killed alongside the road, and you are sent to the inn to investigate. Once there, you meet a battle mage who helps you kill the clearly suspicious other guest with another battle mage after you act like a helpless traveling salesman. Very mage-like. But here's where my theory comes in. The two mages you meet in this quest, Ariel and Reliant, were created concurrently, which makes sense seeing as they figure into the same quest and only appear for said quest's duration. However, the main culprit in the quest, Necromancer Caminalda, wasn't created at the same time as them. She was created alongside the innkeeper and the server though, implying that they were made as one big package. And that's when it hit me. Could this Mages Guild quest just be a repurposed miscellaneous quest? I mean, this Mages Guild quest controls both unique dialogue from the innkeeper as well as Caminalda. Yet, despite this, they don't ever mention Ariel's existence. In fact, if you were to take her out completely, nothing would change. It would still function in the same manner, and all the dialogue would follow each other up naturally, at least for Oblivion standards. Couple that with the fact that Caminalda has some unused pre-quest dialogue, and the fact that we know for certain that Bethesda repurposed at least one other miscellaneous quest in order to create Coral's recommendation quest. I don't know. There is no concrete proof here, but it all fits a little bit too well, you know? And then there's also Kiara. She's super noteworthy in my eyes, as she might be the only NPC in the entire game that doesn't have any AI. Just none. That's super strange, as even the most basic of test NPCs have some kind of default AI package. That's kinda the whole point of those packages, to make sure that everyone moves at least a little bit. Not Kiara though. If I had to guess, I'd say that she originally did have packages, but those got completely deleted, which left her without anything, and no one ever noticed. Unlike people like Boreon though, she does have unique dialogue. So she's not some kind of throwaway character, she just doesn't have any AI. Oh, and you guessed it, the publican Christoph Moran? He's randomly a trainer again, this time an advanced trainer in Blunt. Why not? You know, why not give one of the only interesting rumors about Irene Medrick to the random pointless innkeeper? Okay, last interesting thing about this inn here. Christoph's bat has the unique bat disease script attached. This script gives the bat a 20% chance of getting the player infected with yellow tick when using it. However, as the bat is used by Christoph, the player can't use it, making the script redundant. It was likely meant to be used on the player's bat instead, but alas. Also, super random that only this inn has such a script, but hey, once more, why not? And with that, I've run out of inns to talk about. Thank God. There is something I just now realized after all these years though. I don't think these inns are as bad as the random towns. At least these kinda have a point outside of the quest, and a majority of its inhabitants have at least some unique dialogue, while all the towns really are just pointless when taken out of the context of their related quest. I honestly didn't see that conclusion coming after all this time, as I've always hated these. I guess you don't really know a game until you've dissected it to Oblivion and back. Now we get to the real OCD stuff. How OCD are we talking? Well, I managed to make a proper chart of the inconsistencies I want to mention here. So every city in Cyrodiil has a stable, and each stable has two people running it. Don't say it, we'll get to that. And this duo system might be one of the most consistent things in the game, while also being pretty inconsistent. For example, due to one coding bug affecting the scripts shared by all these people, they all lose some of their unique dialogue to it. That's the amount of copy-pasting we're down to. But what's all this cut content talk? That's not what I'm here for. No, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Their inventories and stats. While every ostler has a nice set of AI packages to make selling horses go smoothly inside of the stables, all the stable hands have packages to eat, sleep and work. And while these are all unique to each NPC, they are basically exactly the same for all of them. And that's where the oddities come in. Each ostler is actually really consistent. They are all of the correct ostler class, and they all carry an iron short sword. The stable hands, now they're a bit more inconsistent. For example, while all the stable hands are generally of the commoner class, Breville's Antoine Branc is a farmer, while Coral's Northill is also an ostler. Strange, but so be it. Besides Northill, there are 4 other people in the game who have the ostler class despite not being ostlers. Well, 3 actually. One is the unused NPC Riz Frelmaton, who was meant to be an ostler, but he and his stables were cut from the game. The other 3 are Adosi Seretti, one of the Ailswell sisters, and then Boreon and Kiara, both inconsequential NPCs living at roadside inns we've encountered last chapter. Now, what does that mean? Honestly, I couldn't tell you, but I've always found it really strange. Even stranger is that all 3 are set at level 10, and the Brina Cross Inn even has a random horse outside that's completely pointless and just copied over from the Coral stables. Did Kiara lose all of her AI packages because she was originally meant to be an ostler? Did Boreon lose all of his unique dialogue because he was meant to be an ostler? Was the town of Ailswell meant to have stables? I don't know. These NPCs having those classes would seem to imply that, but there are no other leftovers implying this in the slightest. But where were we? Oh yeah, class consistency. Just like their ostlers, the stable hands also have a weapon of choice, that being the iron war axe. Each one consistently has this item. Each one except Anvil's Ernest, who just has no weapon at all. At least each stable hand consistently has a rake, which they need for their raking AI package. Also, for some reason, all of their rakes are consistently marked as respawning, despite, their rakes being unable to break. This was likely just done as a failsafe by Bethesda to make sure their packages don't break, as they need a rake for it to work. This does lead to some weirdness if you ever try the looties from their bodies though, giving you possibly unlimited rakes. Another constant in their inventories is food, needed for their eat package. They all have 3 instances of random food items placed in their inventories, all except for Breville's Antoine Branc and Leowin's Ataba, who have no food in their inventory at all. For those keeping scores at home, that results in Humilis Nonius, Tilmo and Mirina Arano being the most consistent stable hands with 0 oddities, and Antoine Branc being the most inconsistent with 2 oddities. I don't know why, but I was always fascinated by these stable guys and how consistent their design was. In theory at least. Oh yeah, what's that? I forgot one. Right. Well, yes. While every stable in the cities around Cyrodiil are nice and consistent with each other, the one in the Imperial City sure isn't. For starters, this stable has 1 ostler and 2 stable hands rather than 1. None of the people here are actually of an ostler class either, so that's fun. And proprietor Snegra Burra also doesn't wield the correct iron longsword. She instead goes without a weapon. This only kinda annoys me to no end, as I can at least guess as to why this is. The stable hands, Brilus and Restita, are at least kinda consistent, as they still have the random 3 pieces of food and the respawning rake, but for some reason they carry rusty iron war axes instead of the normal variant, making them the only 2 NPCs in the game to do so. Also, they have different AI packages than most other stable hands, as they have specific night AI where they go around with torches, which is kinda cool. But in case you didn't know, or you once knew but meanwhile forgot, the reason as to why Chestnut Handy stables are so weird is because they were cobbled together from good content. As the stables themselves were once apparently located where Way now is, Snegrabura was once related to the Mages Guild, and Restita was a stable owner herself. Brelus's original purpose is kinda unclear, but seeing as he was created concurrently with Restita, it's quite possible that he was intended to be her stable hand originally. Oh, and final nitpick, unlike everyone I've mentioned so far, not counting the level 10 oddballs, Restita Statilia is the only person who's inexplicably level 3 instead of 4, as is the norm for standard townsfolk. And I guess that's as good of a segue as I'm gonna get for my next topic. Like I just said, your average NPC level in Oblivion is 4. Just like it is in Skyrim, until it isn't, and unlike Morrowind, where it's just a big grab bag of whatever. Oblivion kinda makes sense, until you start looking into things. For example, the standard level for a publican or innkeeper in Oblivion is 6, with 11 of the 32 available publicans being set up as such. However, there are also 9 people who are level 5, 4 people are level 15, these are all random roadside innkeepers, while another, a bookie, is the only one at level 20. 2 are level 8, and the 5 remaining people are leveled with the player. But wait just a minute, because this stat actually isn't correct, seeing as it only counts people of the publican class. However, not every publican is of said class, no, as that would make too much sense. Dirham Seredi of Ailswell is level 10, same as everyone in the village, so that at least makes some sense. What makes less sense is that his class is Merchant, which is the same for the other unmentioned innkeepers, Main Lorne and not Flavinius Venedius, who are both also set at level 5, ultimately tying the scores and giving us an unclear answer as to what level a publican should be. General traders don't fare much better. Out of the 20, 6 are level 8, 6 are level 6 and 4 are level 5. Smiths have the same problem, and in case we haven't quite caught on yet, sometimes there just doesn't seem to be a logic behind the system, unlike the pragmatic crafting of the ostlers and stable hands. If you go by location, you may find similarities such as the market district. At first sight I thought there was some pattern, but that doesn't seem to be the case. You have some merchants at level 10, some at level 8, some at 6, others at 5. The ones that train have higher levels, and Edgar Voltrine is one of only 3 NPCs in the game that's set at level 14. The others being Leowin's Margard and Coral's Atrugar. What do these 3 have in common? Absolutely nothing. 3 of the 5 level 7 NPCs in the game are Kvatch refugees, while the other 2 are just random citizens. Other uncommon levels are 9, which is exclusive to Dovin Aaron, 11, which is used by 4 NPCs that have no ties whatsoever, 12, 13, 14, these levels all just have random assortments of NPCs assigned, and nothing like class, location or faction rank matters apparently, as it's all just randomly assigned it would seem. But you wanna know where my fascination with these levels comes from? Well, that actually has to do with Skyrim, as with all things Elder Scrolls related to me. Skyrim's levels are also kinda inconsistent, but they're way less all over the place. Okay, so when I was writing the line in the script, I looked at Skyrim's levels to check, only to find out that there are even more different levels used on NPCs there. But I'm not crazy. Those values get kinda skewed because there are numerous random NPCs such as bandits, mages, necromancers or forsworn that also appear on those lists. So all in all, I swear, the general levels of Skyrim's populace are less all over the place than Oblivion. But when the developers made Skyrim, they didn't really care that much about the levels of their NPCs it would seem, as you will encounter a lot more level 1 NPCs there. Level 1 being the default level, showing that the devs didn't alter it. And when the Dragonborn DLC came, they really didn't care. To give just one example, everyone in the Skal village except for Storn and Freya are level 1 NPCs of the Dremora class, both being the default values. The devs didn't touch those. Okay, they made Wolf a warrior by class, but he's still level 1. Like, what? Did you guys give a septum when designing these guys or not? To get back on track. This isn't the case for Oblivion. Basically, every level 1 NPC in Oblivion is level 1 because of a logical reason. I hope you're ready for another round of statistics. I'll promise to keep it brief. So, of the total of 45 level 1 NPCs in Oblivion, not counting test NPCs of course, 23 appear in the game as corpses. 2 of them suffer a scripted death, and 13 appear as Dark Brotherhood targets and are intentionally made low level so they're easy and satisfying to kill. This leaves a total of just 7 NPCs who shouldn't be level 1, but are, in comparison to Skyrim's like fucking 80. 2 of the people here, Termanwe and Vlaramel Orius, only exist during Sanguine's quest and serve no further role besides being set dressing for the Countess's gathering. They are actually 2 of the 4 people that exist for such a purpose. The other 2, Britta and Jaras Inval, are leveled to be player +1. This implies that the other 2 were meant to be leveled in the same way, at least to me. Funnily enough, while Termanwe and Vlarimul are level 1, the default level, They are of noble class, while Britta and Jaris are leveled but have the default acrobat class. They were probably meant to be set to noble as well. And yes, acrobat is the default class due to appearing first alphabetically. Almost all test NPCs in Oblivion and basically all unused NPCs in Morrowind are of acrobat class. The next pair of level 1 NPCs consists of Kovan Kren and Jack Silver. And if those ridiculous names haven't clued you in then I'll say it just now, we're looking at the Thieves' Den DLC. And seeing as all the other purchasable people are set at level 10, I'm inclined to believe that Bethesda just forgot to add a 0 with these guys. Then there's also Minerva, who resides at the Inn of Ill Omen. I can't quite explain why she would be level 1, besides the fact that she's at the same place as Rufio, who is a Dark Brotherhood target and therefore also level 1. And then there's also Kellen, who gets added with the Knights of the Nine. Kellen is a deadly ill man who doesn't do all that much except lie down for the majority of the time you know him. So him being level 1 isn't that surprising, seeing as he's supposed to be in very poor health. All of his stats also correspond to their default values, implying that Bethesda just didn't touch his level or stats at all. And then the last NPC is Feral Ravel, the quest giver at Sheogorath's shrine. And similar to the NPCs related to the Sanguine Shrine quest, it's quite clear based on the other NPCs at the shrine that Feral was meant to be leveled one level above the player, rather than just a static level 1. See? Every single level 1 NPC can be logically explained. Now that's what I call consistent design. I have to give it to Oblivion. Now the shrines themselves are quite a good example of this. Meaning, of course, our next chapter is all about shrine design. In rhyme. No, let's not do that. But besides stables, I think I spent the most time just gawking at the shrines and their design quirks. For example, you have a shrine dedicated to every single Daedric prince here, and all of them have the same internal naming scheme. Daedric prince's name, followed by shrine, and then exterior, due to all of these being found outside. You'd think that it would be easy to keep these names consistent, but that's not the case, as every shrine is known as Daedric Prince's Shrine, except for Sanguine, whose shrine is instead known as Shrine of Sanguine. This is the naming scheme that the statues at the shrines themselves follow, and those are all consistent, so I don't know what happened there. Also, for some reason, each shrine has 3 worshippers, all except those for Sheogorath and Peryite, which have 5 each. Why? I couldn't tell you. Something that personally bothers me is how there is a shrine for every prince except Mehrunes Dagon, and I know what you think. He has his own special shrine because he's involved in the main quest. Well yeah, but that only makes sense if you think of it as a set piece. But purely logically speaking, if there's a shrine to every prince, why wouldn't there be one for Dagon? Like, these shrines have stood here for ages probably, long before anyone knew of what Dagon was planning. So why wouldn't he have a shrine? I mean, I know the answer to that question already. It's the same reason as to why there isn't a guide to Gvatch written in the game, but all other cities have one. It's because whoever was responsible for those kinds of connections just didn't think it would be necessary. Why read about a city that's only a ruin in the final game? Why visit a small shrine to a prince if you're going to encounter a bigger one in the main quest anyways? The writers had gameplay in mind, and not so much storytelling. And while I don't agree with that ideology, I at least understand it. Still, it would have been cool to see the small shrine abandoned or something. Now, you want to see some stats again? Out of the 49 people at these shrines, 39 of them are leveled with the player. 34 of those are set at one level above the player, so the great majority. 35 if you count Feral Ravel among them. 3 of them are leveled to be one level below the player. This includes 1 Mafala worshipper and the 2 non-quest giving worshippers at Malakat's shrine. And then 2 people are randomly set as the same level as the player, those being 1 non-quest giver from Boethia's shrine and 1 from Vermina's shrine respectively. And speaking of Boethia, this is the only mainline game where their name is consistently spelled without a second H, so that's something. Of the final 10 people that have a static level, 9 if we scrap feral, 7 of them are level 10, the second most frequent level. For both Meridia's Shrine and Namira's Shrine, the non-quest givers are aesthetic level 10, while the quest giver is leveled player plus 1. Though these are the only 2 shrines where it's applied consistently. Then one person is aesthetic level 25, being a master trainer, and one random worshipper at Nocturnal Shrine is just set at level 6. And no, I can't explain that one. Now for some other random stuff. Classes. While there isn't one consistent class among these worshippers, all of them just have something random, there are a couple that stand out to me. Rijir and Yushi, 2 independent worshippers, are the only 2 NPCs, besides those I've mentioned, that have the default class of Acrobat, which in Oblivion is generally reserved for acrobatics trainers. Actually, I lied. There is one more person with this class, and it's the Thieves Guild member Carwin from the Imperial City. Though maybe she's supposed to have it, maybe not, and she was meant to be an archer like her housemate Metrodel, or maybe something completely different. I don't know, there is no clear-cut answer here. Unlike our next case of Burmima. While completely normal in every other aspect, Burmima's class is set to Conjurer. She is one of only 2 NPCs in the game with this class, the other being Martin Septim himself. In all likelihood, she was meant to have the Commoner class, which is quite common among these worshippers, unlike Conjurer. She doesn't even have a related spell list. But speaking of those spell lists though, they usually line up with the NPC's class. So for example, an alchemist has an alchemist list, an agent has an agent list, and so on. Neither Martin nor Burmima make use of the Conjurer list, as Martin knows a bunch of unique spells, while Burmima knows none. The Conjurer list is only used by 2 named NPCs in the base game, Urtor and Jan Vrasoric, both of which are sorcerers by class. And in case you were wondering why I think that Burmima was possibly meant to be of Commoner class, well, again, that class appears on many worshippers, plus the 2 classes are alphabetically right next to each other. And it wouldn't be the first time that Bethesda made such a mistake. It's why Fatis Eulis sleeps in Dulgro Shuk's house, or why Skriva owns Skjorta's merchant chest, or why Jagasta's class is so weird, and I could go on. Then there's Engorm, who is set up as an alchemist merchant, and I suppose I don't need to tell you why that's messed up, although again, I wouldn't know what his correct class was meant to be, and the same goes for Aymar Duar, who is set up as an enchanter merchant, for some reason. And then for my final gripe with these guys, their clothing. Honestly, this couldn't have been any easier on the developers. They're all cultists, right? They don't hide that fact, they're not ashamed of it, so why don't they wear any robes? Oh, I'm sorry, what I should ask is, why don't they wear robes consistently? Or well, they do, but the consistency here is quite inconsistent. Stop me if you heard that one before. So every quest giver at every shrine wears robes. This is always the case, except for Hercene Shrine, where no one does. Guess it doesn't help with hunting or some such nonsense. But while the majority of quest givers wear the standard brown robes known as monk robes, which don't really make sense in this context either way, but hey, some of course do not. Rijir and Maraska from Hermaeus Mora and Clavicus Vile shrines respectively instead wear the very rare tattered robes. The only other one in existence is worn by the infamous Maik the Liar, who also wears the matching tattered hood, which is the only such copy in existence in the base game. Why not give a hood to your cultists, huh? Make them a bit more mysterious. The only other quest giver that doesn't wear a monk's robe is the already mentioned Feral Ravel. He instead wears a standard white mage robe. But I can excuse him, as all the Sheogorath worshippers just wear random bits and pieces of clothing meant to look wacky. If anyone can be inconsistent, it's them. I don't mind that. Of course, in their current state, it wouldn't make sense to give all these worshippers robes, as some of them specifically tell you, speak to the one in robes, or something along those lines, as their dialogue is meant to point you to the quest giver. So there was at least some thought put into it. But then on the other hand, you get Periad Shrine, where everybody just wears the monk robes. all 5 of the worshippers. All nice and consistent. I mean, it just would have made sense. You could have incorporated some of the robes that barely get used in the final game, like the tan robes, or the grey robes, or the green ones. Those last ones you could claim are the symbols of the Sisters of Godelsfond, but A, only one of the 2 sisters present wears the robes, and B, there are other random NPCs wearing them as well. The grey robes are usually associated with the chapel, but again they're very inconsistently worn, as the priests there have the same problem as the worshippers here. Some wear robes, but the majority wear normal clothes. There's no real system there. But then you have people like Vajira wearing the super rare Forester shirt, which at least kinda matches with his shrine, or Pajin wearing the even rarer rugged pants, which just look goofy on him. And that's all I can say about the shrines, though this video is not quite over yet. You thought the naming inconsistencies couldn't get any stupider than with the shrines? Oh, just you wait. Just like those, all chapels share the same internal naming scheme. You have city name followed by chapel of and then name of the divine. In Anvil this becomes Anvil Chapel of the Bella, for example. But again, the locations themselves vary. So you have Chapel of Akatosh, Chapel of the Bella, Chapel of Stendor, but then also Great Chapel of Mara and Talos, but also the Great Chapel of Zenithar, Julianos and Arcay. Again, just why? Did no one look at this and think, hey, this is kinda wonky, I should correct it? I suppose not, seeing as the QA had way more problems on their hands than just naming inconsistency checks. Maybe it even is a writer's job to check that at Bethesda, I have no clue. And like I said before, the chapels are all kinda messy. There isn't much consistency to be found in the way they are designed. For example, despite there being a rank of primate in the faction, not every person that identifies as a primate is of this rank in the faction. Now of course this isn't really an issue exclusive to the chapel. No, the Dark Brotherhood, Fighters Guild, Mages Guild and even the Nobility faction all have this problem where the ranks don't really line up. Those little flaws are too nitpicky even for my taste. Though I did want to add this. Usually the chapel in every town consists of 3 people. The resident healer, the resident priest and the primate. However, Breville and Shadenhall each have another person present, the living saint of their respective divine. I mean, these guys don't really do much, but I like their inclusion from a storytelling point of view. It's very unlike Bethesda to have these guys, since they're all story and no function, which might be why only 2 chapels have living saints, but alas, I think they're pretty cool. The only other chapel person of note is Wiedumja, a refugee who can be found in Kvatch. She never explicitly tells you she's affiliated with a chapel, but she is in the faction. And not only that, she is the only NPC in the whole game that holds the rank of Theurgist. Again, cool, I suppose, though I don't really know what to make of this. And then finally, if you want consistency, look no further than Oblivion's beggars. These guys are all basically identically programmed, serve the same purpose, and all share the same dialogue. And they all have the same unique way of speech. Alas, that's not why I'm mentioning them. Every single beggar in the game is also a nice and consistent level 2. Except Lordjar the Laggard, who is level 3, but besides the faction and dialogue, he is a quest-specific NPC and doesn't really count among the other beggars. What I do find fascinating about him, however, is that each beggar also has their own unique disease. Or at least, almost. For some reason, both beggars in Skingrad have 2 unique diseases each, and one of the 2 beggars in Leyawiin does as well. Fun. Also, the diseases Collywobbles, Swamp Fever and Yellow Tick get used by 2 different beggars, despite there still being diseases used by none at all, such as Dampworm, Droops, Feeble Limb or Witbane, as those are only used by creatures. There's also the disease Ticklebridge, which you may be familiar with. It goes unused in the base game, but it is added to a random hoe in Cindercliff Watch with the Maroon's Razor DLC. But I have to wonder, did the devs always intend to have it sound like an STD? Or did they only realize that after coming up with the name, and did they then double down on it? Guess we'll never know. Oh, and for some reason, all the beggars added by the Shivering Isles just have ataxia. Also, there are a total of 19 relevant beggars in the base game, if we don't count Lartjar. This is an odd number, but that's only due to Likkel, the beggar intended for the arena district of the Imperial City, getting cut. I should also note that despite their very formulaic and artificial nature, I do like that the border cities with lots of non-Imperials, such as Bruma and Leowin, get different races for their beggars. That's a nice touch. And yeah, I suppose I've said all I wanted to say. This has to end sometime, you know. I don't really know what to add here, so did you learn anything interesting? Do you have a weird design quirk you wanna add to the pile? Feel free to do so and let me know in the comments. And I guess, have a nice day.